also like the Sklar brothers.
Oh, I like those guys.
Yeah. They did one. I don't know if they're still doing it. And again, it was one that I like started seeing like them like 3-minute bits of on Instagram, and then I went to YouTube and I started watching like entire episodes at a time. And they were putting out one every day of the pandemic. They called it like the Pandy Pod.
Okay.
It was Sklarbro country. And they would be like riffing on basically like dumb criminal stories having to do with people's strange and crazy behavior. And it was just the two of them sitting side by side on a couch, just fucking hit machines, you know? Because those guys are just such good comedic writers of like writing quippy.
Yes.
You know, delivering like the quip.
Absolutely. There's very little fat on their jokes and their material. It's like you take one word out, it's not going to work. Like, I feel like they're very calculated in that.
And they have such a weird, like, and some of it is them playing the whole twins gimmick. But they have such a weird, funny, like, one-upsmanship of the way they play off of each other, you know?
Do you remember they had this quirky show back in the day? Cheap Seats. And it was about the ridiculous sports that they'd find around the world. Was that on ESPN?
Yeah.
God, I loved that show.
And, like, I loved because they would just do, like, this time it's a dog show. This time it's a hockey game or something. Yeah, I went back and looked some of that up after I'd been watching their like pandemic pod.
Okay.
Because I was like, oh,
I gotta revisit that.
The Sklar, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so they've got some of those old episodes on YouTube and stuff.
Cool, man.
It's worth checking out.
You want to get into it?
Let's get into it.
Let's do it. I'm going to leave all that in, but I'm going to do an official intro now. We'll start the pod officially. Welcome back to Hot Mike. I'm Mike. I'm joined by my good friend Nick Holland here. Welcome back, buddy.
Thanks for having me back, man.
Good to have you back. And today we're going to be a little bit more focused, and we're going to talk about film adaptations of some of our favorite books. Absolutely. Who did it right? Who did it wrong? Let's run the gamut. And I thought a good place to start would be Blade Runner, adapted from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which I have not read. But you have got me reading Flow
My Tears,
Policeman
Said.
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of his trickiest. I love a good clunky title, too.
It's pretty clunky.
Philip K. Dick.
Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. I keep saying Flow My Tears, Said the Policeman. But I got all the words in there. I just didn't put them in the right order.
Yeah,
I'm loving it.
Fair read.
I'm a little past the halfway point. It's fascinating. It's excellent. But that's not what we'll start with. We'll start with Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. I
think though, like bringing it up, there's things I could say about Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said, that I think also apply to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. And I think actually in a lot of ways apply to most of his books and stories that have been turned into movies. It's that Philip K. Dick is such a strangely existential writer. And so much of it is, because I also say real quick, I think there's two camps of sci-fi, and I am clearly in one of them and not in the other one.
Okay.
And I will sometimes, and because we're going to publish this on the internet, so I won't be as mean as I am about it in real life some of the times. But I think that sci-fi and most sci-fi properties, and then also most sci-fi fans, fall into one of these camps.
Okay.
Camp one is that sci-fi is this fascinating way to speculate on current human society and where the trends are going, and sort of be like, oh man, what if we just keep growing like into the internet, right? And so somebody might write a piece that is set in 2050 or 2060 or whatever. Yeah. And and it's everybody just addicted to their internet devices, and it's chipping their head, nobody's interacting anymore. And that's like the interesting oh, what an interesting sociological question to approach. And what does that change in in man's relationship with God and society and intimate partners and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
The other camp of sci-fi is kind of like, well, phaser technology, as demonstrated in season 3 of Star Trek, betrays the principal sciences of phaser technology as established in season 1 of Star Trek. You know, I feel like it's like there's the people who become very concerned with the actual minutia and logic set of that universe and world, and become very like regimented about what is allowed to happen and not happen in those worlds. And I feel like largely, and they become very concerned with like the continuity of the whole thing,
of the universe that has been presented to them. Yeah.
I feel like you get like, and you know, and we've had a lot of popular stories on the media specifically about like Star Wars fans being very rude to some like incontroversial. I remember there was something where it was like, he can't be a black stormtrooper, and it was like, and you see it and you're just like, oh man, guys, like, why this hill? Why are you dying on this hill?
That's a good
you
point.
know? And that's where you get a lot of like the gatekeeping and kind of the established cliches of like comic book guy from The Simpsons. And so I think on some level, I think that very like fastidious view of sci-fi and that half of the sci-fi world doesn't give sci-fi a great reputation amongst people, because because you're inside or you're outside. I think that Philip K. Dick, William Gibson, J.G. Ballard, William S. Burroughs' stuff that's more sci-fi-y. I feel like there's a remarkable amount of sci-fi that is much more of like a, hey, what if? Wouldn't it be crazy if? And so I think that Philip K. Dick's books are a lot about like religion and man's relationship with society. The main character in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, who is, you know, played by Harrison Ford in the movie Blade Runner, he's married in the book. And so some of it is his whole weird relationship with his wife, because there's like this great machine in the beginning of the book where you can program how you want to feel.
Okay.
So you like type it into a console, and his wife programs herself to feel sad because she feels that she ought to, and it's like a point of tension in their relationship because the guy is frustrated and upset that his wife would like choose and program herself to feel sad and down in the dumps.
Okay.
And so that's like an interesting...
Is it a penance that she's doing? Like, does she feel like she deserves to feel sad?
So like an important setup that is left a little nebulous in the movie is that Earth, and it's interesting because they even go back, and in the sequel in 2049, like when they go to Vegas, I feel like they reveal some of this about Earth. Earth is all fucked up in the book.
Right.
And most people have gotten off of Earth.
The off-world colonies. Yes.
They've gotten to the off-world colonies. They like, you see it with like the toy maker guy, you know, because it's like, why is he living in this big building all by himself? And so there are like glimpses you catch of it in the movie, but it's easy enough, especially maybe on your first pass for that stuff to just get lost amongst like movie atmospherics. You know, it's been a while since I read the book, but it's like, it's largely like poor people, civil servants, and people who are already suffering from radiation poisoning. Okay. That are staying on Earth. And so like, and so there's the whole thing of, there's also this thing where the Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep thing is not just a clunky title, as Philip K. Dick likes, but is also important because they own...
Don't they own a pet goat or something.
They own like an android, sheep,
or
goat or something. And most people own android animals, and everybody likes to pretend that their animal is real, and most people's animals aren't real. So there's all this there's a lot less violence or action. Mm-hmm. Most of Philip K. Dick's books, and a lot of them, Minority Report, Total Recall, are based on short stories. Mm-hmm. Even the one, Paycheck, another short story. But the ones that are based on novels is which, Skin or Darkly also comes to mind.
Yeah.
Is they pump a lot of action into most of them, and they make them into cool sci-fi action movies. Whereas the book, as I'm sure you're noticing from Flow My Tears, the policeman mm-hmm. said, is far more of a strange, brooding thought experiment.
Yes.
That you exist in for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And
questioning what is existence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
when you lose your identity, who are you? What are you then?
Right, because mm-hmm. So for your audience at home who hasn't seen it, do you want to give the the elevator pitch on Flow My Tears?
Yeah, so Flow My Tears is about a character, Jason Taverner, and one day he wakes up and he is living a successful life as a television host. He is a famous singer, and he has famous friends, and then the next morning he wakes up and he's in a hotel room, and he's alone, and he's disoriented, and he's slowly discovering that he has no identity and no one knows who he is. And he's very quickly making moves and making decisions on how to navigate without identification, how to get identification on the black market to avoid going into a forced labor camp. Mm-hmm. Is that fair? Is that a fair?
Totally fair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's totally fair.
It's basically reading off the back jacket of the book.
And so the question of and I think it's interesting because, and it's a good place to start too, because mm-hmm. I think it if we're talking about film and movie adaptations, I think there's something so interesting about what is effective in a book versus what is effective in a movie. A book you pick up, you put down, and it takes you, maybe several weeks to mm-hmm. read as you're chipping it off. And a movie is a single serving. Mm-hmm. And so even from that synopsis pitch, and as far as I know, Flow My Tears, the policeman said, has not been adapted into any other media form yet. But it's instantly, even as you were saying it, I was cue chase scene, And there's a couple chase scenes. There's a couple times where he has to get away or out of hairy situations. But so much more of the book is internal.
Yeah.
It's him thinking. It's him wondering about this. And so it's and watching a character wonder something in a movie is of very limited interest.
Yes. And unless you're using voiceover in a very, very specific and effective way, it's very hard to get that across. And you're right. There's so much of this book that is, it's pondering. It's mm-hmm. pondering the situation. It's pondering people's intentions. And we get that from, I believe, two different characters. It's the police general, and then it's also Taverner. And
it's and it's interesting too, because it's easy to backfill and describe somebody's life, what Taverner's life was like as a successful television host, and him recounting his various, romantic entanglements and this. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to jog back through that on a page in a book. And it's very laborious to cover all of that in voiceover or flashbacks mm-hmm. in a movie. It's worth bringing up, too, that Blade Runner had that theatrical cut with Harrison Ford doing voiceover that the studio demanded, that apparently And if you've ever seen it,
Ridley didn't want it.
Ridley
I own a
didn't
copy
want
of it.
And from the sounds of it too, it's
It's unwatchable.
It doesn't seem like Harrison's that stoked on it either. You know, if he's a little deadpan or flat affect some of the time.
Well, and have you heard this rumor that he did it intentionally bad?
I have heard that.
So that the studio would reject it, and they didn't.
And they didn't.
And then they used it, and basically Ridley disowned the film for many years until he got an opportunity to do the director's cut, which is, it's good, it's interesting, and it's very close to that final cut.
Yeah.
That is kind of seen as the definitive version.
Well, and I'm so confused by that, though, because it's like keeping track of the ambiguous choice of whether or not he's a replicant at the end, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of similar, like, to be honest, that reminds me of the spinning top at the end of Inception, right? Because so many
good
people,
parallel. I like
so
that.
many people talk about it, and I'm like, oh, there's a trick in the editing room. Like, it's fun to think about. It's fun to talk about with your friends on the drive home of like, so was he awake or not?
Yeah.
You know? But it's also like, it doesn't really change the reality of it. And so it's interesting because I feel like in the final cut, I feel like Ridley Scott hits the button a little harder that Deckard is a replicant.
He does.
And then I feel like in the Blade Runner 2049 that Dennis Johnson put out, I feel like they make it pretty clear by the given reality of the rest of the movie that he is not a replicant, that he's a human man.
Right.
Because he was able to, like, you know, produce this replicant child with the replicant
with a
woman.
replicant, yeah.
And so it was
Rachel.
it's interesting because it's like, oh, well, where does Ridley's final cut versus director's cut, you know, because I think the director's cut teases at it but leaves you feeling like he's a human dude. And then the final cut more heavily infers that probably he's a replicant too. And then so it was funny in Blade Runner 2049 to see, like, when you realize the Gosling character is a replicant as well as a Blade Runner, it's like interesting to see that. And at first, when I was first watching it, I was like, so that means Harrison Ford was a replicant. And then you meet Harrison Ford and everything else, and I was like, oh, he's not supposed to be a replicant, you know?
It's part of the story and the lore of Blade Runner, the film, that has become, it is the talking point that everyone loves to focus on. But it's fascinating to me that Ridley and Harrison had completely different views on this. Ridley you're right, he wanted to, especially in that final cut, he wanted to go a little heavier handed on that to really leave the audience either questioning it heavier or to outright say, absolutely, he is a replicant. And Harrison is like, that's not how I played it.
Yeah.
I am a man.
He's a man.
Yeah.
I'm
a real boy.
I'm just so tough that sometimes I could be mistaken for a robot because I'm just that gruff and, you know.
So you can speak on it better than I can because I've not read the PKD novel that it's inspired by, but I've heard people talk about it, that to call this a direct adaptation is not accurate, and that it's more accurate that the screenwriters were very aware of the novel and then they wrote their own story. Do you agree with that in some senses?
Yeah, I definitely do agree with that in some senses. It's like worth noting, for instance, that the term Blade Runner never actually appears in the book.
That's from a Burroughs.
He's like a bounty hunter or something. Yeah, well, William S. Burroughs came up with it, but there was another guy whose name escapes me who had a book that was a similar, like, you know, sci-fi smuggling kind of near future thing that a studio had bought and hired William S. Burroughs to write a screen treatment of, and he titled his screen treatment of that as Blade Runner.
Okay.
And then the title gets moved over because, you know, it's like because people in charge with control over money have always exerted force over what the final film product is. You know, sometimes we harken back to these golden eras, and it's like, it was just the art, man. And it's like, well, no, it's been a pretty good business.
Oh, truly.
Since the 1920s,
Mm-hmm.
people have realized there's a lot of money.
There's money in this.
To control the thing.
Yeah.
And so they've controlled it. So it was like, yeah, so it comes from Burroughs. It's like, it's nice to put that Burroughs package on it. Again, I would say that there's a lot of interesting aspects of the book that are about there's like this weird television figure who's sort of like a cult leader called like Buster Friendly, and people like plug into this meditation machine that has this one vision of climbing the hill, and Buster Friendly is narrating it, and so there's some weird like messianic stuff going on. And because I think that for Philip K. Dick, I think he saw the future and technology. I think he saw how the world was changing, and that was what was important to him. Mm-hmm. I think that the movie, in a very powerful way, extracts the core element of that, where it's like, well, we have these robots that we've made to be so human, and so at what point do they have a soul? Mm-hmm. You know, at what point, like, do they cross that line? That's why the Voight-Kampff empathy test thing is fascinating, right? Because it's like, oh, well, like, even these things, physiology is passable as a human, but theoretically, they're going to fail this test. And it's interesting that the test in you know, the book and the movie is about empathy. And it's interesting
the thing that they can't replicate.
That's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing
in
that
replicants.
They don't have is empathy. And that's such an interesting, like, and you know, at the same time, at the end of the movie, when Rutger Hauer is like so sad to see, seems sad to see Chris die. And so it's like, okay, well then, so if he's like, so he's having an emotional response, and this person he was close to died. And it's like, well, isn't that kind of like empathy?
Sure.
And theoretically, and this is like an interesting note, is theoretically, I'm sure you've heard this story too, is Rutger Hauer improvised that Tears in the Rain monologue.
Memories that will be lost, like tears in rain.
Yeah. And it's like, and that's such an incredible piece, and it feels so literary that it's like, it's surprising on some level that isn't in the book.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, it seems so in line thematically that it is mind-blowing that was an ad lib, or it was something like Rutger said to Ridley, he's like, I think I got a good line for this. Yeah. And then, can I do it on the next take? And he did it, and it's like, oh my God, this is like the tagline for the movie.
Yeah, it's impossible to imagine that movie without that line. And it's just is, and I think that it's worth noting. So jumbled up here a little bit, but I do want to say, nice and early in this conversation, as we cover, you know, all the various films we'll cover, is it's like, so I studied theater, and theater is super interesting because you get this play script. Some of the times the person's alive. A lot of times, especially the kind of stuff you're doing in college, person's dead. Been dead for a while.
For a long time.
And there's like this, and different theater people would say or feel different ways about this. But there becomes like, a lot of times it feels like there's this responsibility, right? Because you're getting a text that was written by one human being most of the time, right? This playwright has just birthed this story and these lines of dialogue. And then one of the things about like doing a live play and doing all these productions of the play is that the directors and actors are all going to make choices. And so there's this responsibility, or there's this idea that there's no one right way to do it. And because so that if you and I were going to do a production of Hamlet, you know, we're going to do this production of Hamlet, that there's some power or responsibility or this irrevocable change that even if we didn't want to do it, that our Hamlet would be different because we were doing it in 2021.
Sure.
In Fort Collins, Colorado, or, you know, wherever we are, whoever we are doing it as, that is like invariably going to change it, and it's going to make it this version of Hamlet. And I even remember that you'd get scripts, and you'd have to do a script and a scene, and there'd be all of their actions, their physical actions and movement written down in the script. And some professor fairly early in a playwriting class told me that the majority of those, if you're looking at a Shakespeare play or a Chekhov play or something, the majority of those were just written down by a stage manager as they were like initially blocking the play.
I see.
So like moves to the table, pours another drink, isn't necessarily something that Anton Chekhov
that's not
wrote
direction
in this
from
play.
him. Yeah, or
that
the
was
author.
It was the stage manager or the director. It was the director and the actors deciding to do it that time, and the person who was taking notes the first time the play happened.
Okay.
And so, like, in the instant you, like, start thinking about things in that way, it makes this thing that's written down far less set in stone. Right? And so, like, and there's still importance to, like, honoring the lines and honoring what the intention is, but it's kind of like the charm of live theater being like this thing has to happen in its own way. You know, if we're trying to just replicate some production of this they did in 1930 or something, then we're doing a disservice to whoever comes sees this.
Have you had that experience where you'll take a classic work and then basically remove all of the stage direction and say, let's figure out, instead of right at this moment he moves to stage left or he moves down in front, have you removed that completely and just looked at the words and the dialogue and said, how do we do this? How do we move?
Well, so a lot of times you get an edit because like is so rarely like Shakespeare plays, if they run entirely as they're written, they're super long. And so a lot of times somebody's like, I want to pull off this Shakespeare play in an hour and a half. You know, something. So stuff gets cut. So a lot of the times, especially if you're dealing with like a old long classic play, you're starting with something way longer than whatever is going to be on stage. So I would regularly like and it's different. Again, it's different for plays written by modern writers because you can get like sued if you don't do the lines right, you know? And so, but most people writing and publishing modern and new plays also are writing them to only be like an hour and a half long.
Okay.
So it's like, it's with the old ones that stuff really gets tinkered. But I would get the play script book and I would like almost immediately disregard what the stage directions were because somebody might choose to do something wildly different. And you have all of these people. You got, you know, not only all the actors, not only all the directors, but you got a set designer. You might have people that are adding the sound effects or scores. You got the people, you know, building and designing the props, the costume designers. So there's so many people who are like putting in their vote and their artistry, and it makes it into this thing that is much bigger. And so I wanted to like hit that point right at the beginning of talking about book to film things.
Yes.
Because books are more or less the product of one person. Most people
one
have
person's
like an editor.
Yeah.
You know?
One creative process rather than maybe a community of 50 to 500 people who are all putting in their creative energy towards a vision that becomes the film that you experience.
Especially for a movie, because you've also got all of the creative workers on it, and then you got like the boardroom and the money people.
Oh yeah.
And so like again, like adding in, forcing voiceover into this thing, when the director theoretically, when we're thinking about it and talking about it from outside, theoretically the most important person, you know, the decider, at least on set while they're shooting it, and the editor, and then suddenly, you know, it's like, no, there's voiceover in it. We want to walk people right through it, you know?
It's like, well, that's not how I wrote the script, or that wasn't the plan.
Yeah. And so it's crazy.
And in Blade Runner, it's atrocious. It's I actually, an ex-girlfriend, she was living at a distance. Like, we were doing long distance for a time, and we were giving each other movie recommendations. And I told her to watch Blade Runner, but I wasn't specific. And she just went to I mean, I think it was the original theatrical release. And I'm waiting with anticipation, like, to call the next day and like, hey babe, what'd you think of Blade Runner? And like, she didn't know how to break it to me, but she was like, so you really like this movie? Like, you really, really like it? I mean, I like Harrison Ford too, but this movie? And it is so different. It's so drastically different.
How long did it take? I gotta go back. How long did it take for you guys to figure out you were talking about different incarnations of Blade Runner?
I want to say it was like less than a minute for me to realize she had seen the wrong one. Now, that's not saying that you like, if you see the final Blade Runner final cut, that you're gonna love that and that's your kind of movie. Right. It's a classic for so many people, but it's not for everybody. But if you're comparing the two of them, one of them is a far superior.
Well, and
film.
I'd say that you can
subjectively
base it. Well, I'd say that director's cut and final cut are just about equally as good.
Yeah,
you know, but yeah, and then that theatrical cut, I feel like that's,
and there's been like 7 cuts or something.
Jeez.
Which I'm not crazy that Ridley does that. That he has multiple. I mean, occasionally I'll enjoy a director's cut. Nothing is coming to mind, but like, the fact that he has multiple versions. I just saw Kingdom of Heaven.
Okay.
The Orlando Bloom and Ed Norton and Jeremy Irons one about the Crusades.
Oh yeah.
But online, apparently the original film is not, once again, the studio tampered with his vision, and they released a film. I don't know why this keeps happening to this poor guy, but it must be in negotiating contracts that he just doesn't ever get final cut. I'm not sure why, because it really is.
Well, so
to get his vision, that's the best way to do it. Yeah. But apparently the version that I just watched of Kingdom of Heaven is supposed to be the definitive. It is the director's cut. It is long as hell, but it's great, and it's great historical dive. But apparently it's like, why is the shit that we're releasing of his in the theater not as good as what he can release? Why does this keep happening to this poor guy?
I think it is. It's fascinating though, because of how often these guys' initial theatrical cuts are, 3+ hours.
Yeah. They're like, I can't leave anything on the editing
because it's
room
like,
floor.
And on some level that way, I understand when the money people are like, yeah, it's hard to get people to show up to a 3.5 hour long movie.
We can't sell this.
You have to cut an hour out of it. And I rarely, because I say that, like, if I ever watch him, because, and it's interesting the Blade Runner one is so dramatic, because I can't think of a single instant. And I think you kind of said something similar a moment ago. With the exception of the Blade Runner story, unfortunately, I saw the director's cut first. Mm-hmm. But it was like, and wound up watching the theatrical as kind of a piece of trivia, You know,
you gotta
like
see it.
Like, oh man, what do you mean this voice?
To have an opinion on it, it's like it's important.
Being like, well, a voiceover can't be that bad, and then you turn it on and you're like, oh Jesus!
Did
wow.
Harrison Ford just drop an N-bomb?
Just fucking tanked it. Yeah. You're like, oh. And so I can't think of any movie where I like hated the theatrical release and then was like, this movie was entirely turned around by the director's cut. And most of the movies I've watched the director's cut version of first or something, I've enjoyed it and been like, you know, if somebody cut a half hour out of that, I don't know that it would have like broken the movie for me, you know?
You know what director's cut I could not stand, and I think it ruined the movie, was Donnie Darko. I'm okay with Richard Kelly releasing it, like where it's like, this is my original vision, right. But the theatrical release was fantastic. It was near perfect.
Well, and that's why that's we have this like with both authors and auteurs, we have this like this funny thing where it's like, oh, the idea that these guys were edited or censored ever at all is a crime. Most people benefit from a second pair of eyes.
Totally.
You know? Even if you are a genius. Like when I read Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace.
Yeah.
I put it down and I was like, could have used a fiercer edit. You know?
Yeah.
I was like, because I read the footnotes too, and so you just get to the end of this like 1,100 page book.
I've never gotten through it.
And he kind of drops you off in the middle of nowhere, which made the title Infinite Jest a little bit more of like a snide. I was like, are you laughing at me? And you understand why this book has the legendary reputation it does. Because it's so intimidatingly long, and has so many footnotes, so it's such a daunting, complex read. And I read it, and I got to the end of it, and I was like, and it definitely had like good moments and scenes, but I remember just being struck by the thing of like, yeah, I would have been fine if that was only 700 pages instead of 1,100 pages.
Totally.
And so it's that thing where sometimes this auteur reputation, it's like editors are important. It's an unsung hero.
Absolutely.
Of film and literature. When somebody is like, hey, man, you got a little far up your own asshole here for this one, you know?
I found that editing a short film of mine where I found myself arguing with I was stuck in the edit. So I hired an editor, and we sat with it for several days, and we're working through all of the footage because I basically gave him, this is my rough cut, and it just wasn't working. It wasn't there. And so we went through the footage and stuff, and he's making changes that I'm like, this is kind of changing the story or the focus. And I'm like, that's not what is in the script. And he's like, I'm just telling you what you got. Like, I know that this was the story you were trying to tell. That's not what you got. Like right now, the footage is telling this story, and this is the one we have to go with. I know the original vision had this little arc or whatever. It's like, it's not there. The actors didn't pull it off, or you didn't pull it off as a director. It was an extremely humbling experience, but I left that experience so grateful that I was like, he absolutely cut a better film than I ever could have of my own work. I was too close to it.
Yeah, absolutely too close to it.
Yeah.
And I've had that experience with,
because I even asked him,
of writing, and
I was like, do you want to read the script? He's like, I don't need it.
I see what you
gave me the footage. That's all we need. I don't need like, the story is here. Whether it's the story that's on your page or not, that's a different.
And it's where like film editing and book editing too, but it's like they're both their own art forms, as opposed to like merely proofreading the work of another. And it's another pair of outside eyes, and it's this thing that is a cumulative process because it has the efforts of so many people. And to to bring up a parallel idea from what we talked about last time.
Yeah.
So, you go watch.
Last episode.
Go watch.
Uh-huh.
But we talk about how, when we were talking about visual art, we were talking about how you're wrestling it out of whatever's happening, but when things are going really well or clicking, you are merely the conduit for this process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I forget who it is, but it's like, Da Vinci or Michelangelo or something, and this is probably one of these stories that is not even true because hundreds of years ago, but like one of them says something about, somebody asked them like, well, how do you sculpt this out of marble? And he's like, well, I just cut the rest of the marble away.
Yeah.
And
I get the vision. Is it like, I think it was Da Vinci, right?
I see what's in there.
And I remove.
And I have to remove all the excess, And that's like, and so.
It's incredible.
And so we talked about that with art though, right?
Uh-huh.
That when it really clicks to art and you're like really in this process, then my hands are just doing the utility, and I always hope that I'm not like doing too much, or that I stop and listen to what else I have to cut out of the stamp, And so I feel like it's like film, because again, it's this giant cumulative effort of so many people. So how could one person still be the singular owner of that? And how would we even decide or prioritize who that is? Is it the person who wrote it down? Is it the person who was the captain of the ship while you were filming it all? Or is it the person in the editing room hodgepodging it together? And it's like, and that all of those things, including like the cinematographer, right? Like the director has this idea of, I want it shot like this. And they've hired a cinematographer or a director of photography or something who is the person there to solely think of it in terms of like the optical language and technical aspect of achieving it.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden you get, it's a big wide shot and it moves, and that's like a job of 3 or 4 other people who are also experts at what they do.
Yeah. Now let's make a wide shot and make it move. Like, let's do that in the best possible way. That's our job. That lives with us.
Yeah.
So the success of that task lives with them. Yet when you get Best Picture, the director goes up and
some of the producers.
And some of
the producers, they're standing behind him and be like, we were in charge of this whole thing.
I say that as if I even watch or care about award shows.
I don't either at this point. But
I don't like competitive art.
But I remember them. More than I don't like competitive art, I hate losing. I hate losing. And so there was a while when I first started getting into all this, I thought I was just going to kill it at a competitive art. And then I lost enough times to get the bad taste in my mouth. And it was like, well, if this is the focus, then I'm probably going to stop. Because the setup, because winning is so ephemeral. And you're a loser forever. If it's solely the binary of I won or I lost.
Winning is a firecracker. It blows up in the sky and then
and losing is a firecracker that blows up in your pocket.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
I remember a great quote from David Wayne.
Okay.
And he said that 90% of directing is casting. He felt it was so important that the actors are going to be the ones who actually tell my story, or which is interesting. Like, he's one of the greatest comedy directors of our generation.
And it's interesting too. It's like watching that ensemble of people from the state.
Yeah.
And how long they work together and how long the trust. And so on some level,
make Wet Hot American Summer.
And so I get it that he'd be like, oh yeah, well, this is Joe Latruggio's decision because he's the best player to put in this part, And then so you just you trust over to that instinct, whether it's them entirely riffing or making up stuff or performing lines that are on the page. And so I think there's a way that very often comedy is, and comedy is remarkably difficult. You know, I don't want to like, although also very natural and organic, and then wow, tough to like replicate consistently that degree of like natural organic funniness. But comedy is a very interesting, simple crucible because so much of it is it funny? And I think that like, and it can be reductive to judge it by this, but you can judge comedy solely by the laugh-o-meter, you know, and on a sentence by sentence basis that works pretty good. We thought they were going to laugh here, they didn't laugh here. Oh well, then it failed to be funny. It could have failed for any number of reasons, but it's ultimately it's funny or it's not.
Yes.
And I think that the problem with like, you know, a Ridley Scott movie is that gravitas and that depth that's so much more of an abstract thing to give a pass or a fail. You know, which is not, which I also don't want to say that I think that makes, you know, drama more difficult than comedy to enact or do, but I am saying that like the line judge of it, you know, it's like comedy has a simpler and then on some levels like a more absolute rubric. Yeah. Because you go, I thought they were going to laugh then, and they didn't. You know? Yeah. And then there's all the science of the experiment. So but depth and gravity and like, did they get that this is a sad part? And how often do we see films where it's like they really bop you on the nose with the sad thing?
Oh, totally.
Like, I'm not a fucking idiot.
Yeah, I get it's sad. Okay.
I get that it's sad.
Yeah, you did not have to rub my nose in it.
Between the music cues and this and that, you know, it's like, yeah, I knew it was sad, you know.
Do you know George Roy Hill? He did Butch and Sundance and The Sting. Sure. So he talked about, so originally Butch and Sundance was going to be a comedy. And you see comedic elements.
Fun.
It's fun. Certainly there are funny moments. But it was, even when the production started, it was like, we're making a comedy. And Paul Newman really leaned into that. And Robert Redford was basically like, I'm going to hold back and I'll be the straight man. I'll be the stoic one. But George was talking about, he's like, I see no difference between directing drama and directing comedy. He said it's all about believability. That's all I have to do is make the audience believe the scene. If it's funny and they believe it, they'll laugh. If it's funny and they believe, or if it's sad and they believe it, they'll cry. He's like, that is absolutely how I see the difference. It's just I need to make what is the story and how can I make the audience believe it? Yeah. And I don't think that's right or wrong. I just think it's an interesting approach to storytelling.
That runs actually interestingly parallel to, I think, one of the most important things that a college professor ever told me that shaped my approach to performance ever since. This guy, Walt Jones, was the head of the theater department while I was at CSU Theater. He had like a very strong name-droppy resume of like working in the industry on various coasts, and some of the people he'd worked with. He'd gone to the Yale School of Drama at the same time that like Meryl Streep did, and he and the playwright, he'd done a lot of work with the playwright Christopher Durang while they were both at Yale, and then he moved up to New York and was doing Broadway shows with Christopher Durang, doing like sound design for Durang. He wrote some plays and directed plays. He worked with like John Turturro and Tony Shalhoub, Liev Schreiber. You know, this like random list of like names. And he taught at some school in San Diego before he'd made his way out to CSU. And you know, so he's an older gentleman now. I think he still teaches there. I don't think I think he stepped down from the head of the department, you know. And so like, you know, Fort Collins, great place to like land and wind up, right? Out of the hustle and bustle. But so he had this class, my favorite class, probably all of college, and it was only Chekhov scenes. It was an entire semester where we only did scenes from the plays of Anton Chekhov.
Okay.
And right off the bat,
what are some examples of his work?
Like
I'm not as
Cherry
well-versed in theater.
Orchard, Uncle Vanya, Three Sisters. He has a lot of sad Russian plays.
Okay.
I would say, and I would say that's what people remember and think of him as now.
Okay.
Sad Russian, early 20th century. A lot of people dying in rural Russian places.
Are there any happy Russian plays?
Not that I am aware of. I think that even some of the Russia's an intense place. Those people got a lot going on. It's very cold, very brutal.
Yeah.
You know,
those are different kind of white people.
Yeah.
They're tough. Those are very hard people.
They've been through it.
Yeah,
they've been through it. But so he told this great story right at the beginning of class about how Anton Chekhov was writing these plays, handing them into the Moscow Art Theater, and at the time, the director of the Moscow Art Theater was Stanislavski, who's a famous name for like the Stanislavski method. So most people studying theater run into his method acting formats and versions and stuff. So he's very taught. And there's theoretically these old manuscripts where Anton Chekhov has handed in his manuscript, and it translates from Russian into him saying like Three Sisters, a tragic comedy in 3 acts. Or something, right?
Okay.
And he hands it over. And then theoretically, according to the anecdote, you know, it's the shitty part about the internet is now you can just actually find out. A lot of romance has been extracted from the world because the truth is somewhat more accessible. But like Stanislavski crossed out tragic comedy and wrote a tragedy and had like decided not playing this for laughs.
Okay.
And then, so Walt then played us a bunch of like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and, you know, the silent film greats, and was like, you know, look to see what kind of environmental comedy. It doesn't have to be slapstick, not necessarily like slipping and falling on banana peels and stuff, but what environmental comedy and like in the interaction and status relationships between the characters might like, you know, really. So like an example here, it'd be like if I was in the room and you walked in the room and I saw that you also had a beard with a slightly larger mustache, and then I wanted to emphasize that my mustache was, and so I started surreptitiously, almost subconsciously, like twisting my mustache and seeing if you were intimidated or afraid of my mustache. So that'd be like, that's a thing that you can add to the script that is not in there, but it plays for a laugh, and it plays about our relationship, that I have some kind of insecurity or something, you know, and that I'm trying to like assert myself slightly higher by doing that, you know. And then you see that I'm doing that, and you surreptitiously pull out one of those tiny little mustache combs, and then you start, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but Walt said about that, and as he encouraged us to find comedy in these things, he said that it's inaccurate to think about a play or a scene as a comedy or a drama, because it's important that if you're a character in a comedy, it's important that your character takes their reality seriously. Because if they're being like cheeky and like looking, then it's going to deflate the laughter for the audience. So that the most important part of comedy becomes tension on some level. So your character has to take their reality seriously, dramatically. And then that in drama, if your character is just weeping and play then that's going to be like alienating or off-putting for people to watch too.
Yeah.
Real life is also funny. So if you're like in a believable drama, then your character has a sense of humor about their reality. And if your character watches somebody slip and fall on a banana peel, they're going to have that same instantaneous guffaw of laughing that people naturally do, because it's more weird and unnatural if they go, "Oh, my dear friend has fallen under the banana peel yet again," you know, and if you're taking that seriously, then people are probably going to laugh at you. So it was the split difference where this teacher told me, and I was like 20 or 21 or something, you know, and he tells me, like, well, don't put too much stock in whether this is a comedy or a drama, because they've both emerged out of depictions of real life. And, you know, that ultimately what we are doing is we are trying to package and represent real life and pull off the trick. Yeah. You know, so that people lose themselves in it.
Boy, that's great advice.
Yeah. It changed every part, every performance, every role, because it's like, if I'm in a comedy, then I'm like, what are the serious parameters of this character's reality? And if I'm in a drama, then it's like, how does this character really exist fluidly and elastically in the world that they are?
Wow, it's such a balance between the two. And if you don't strike that balance where both exist, then you fall purely in drama or purely in comedy, it's almost like it doesn't work for our brains. We're like, I mean, that was okay, but it was clearly...
Well, you can tell it's fake.
The Coen brothers are some of the best. They have some of the funniest dramas you ever seen.
Yeah.
And it's these moments of tension that are broken up with mundane realism, where a character makes a comment, or they're focusing on something in the scene specifically that you're like, God, why is he fixating on this? This is hilarious.
Yeah.
But you're like, this is a deadly serious scene. And I am so amused by the reality of this guy can't stop focusing on. Yeah, I'm trying to think of which is the best example.
So because I wrote it down on my list.
Yeah.
So I have to bring up No Country for Old Men as the perfect example.
I got it on my list too.
Because
nice.
No Country for Old Men is also the perfect opposite example of like versus the PKD thing we were talking about. Because that movie winds up so loyally close to that book. There's, like, off the top of my head, I can think of 2 scenes that are in the book and are not in the movie. It's like when the Woody Harrelson character is after the shootout at the hotel. The Woody Harrelson character goes in and he finds, like, a person that has been killed by a stray bullet from that thing, and he's, like, walking around in the hotel. And then there's, like, Llewellyn goes and has a drink with a woman.
Yes.
And decides not to cheat on his wife, but he, like, goes and has his drink with this flirty woman, and instead he merely walks past her and says something to her outside the pool at the last hotel.
That's right.
And so I forgot about those. Those are the 2 things that the Coen brothers just, like, extracted. And who knows? Maybe if there was a director's cut that, you know, they put out that's a half hour longer, maybe those 2 things would be in there. But it was like they captured the bones of it. And in it, Josh Brolin, Woody Harrelson, Javier Bardem, and Tommy Lee Jones and his deputy have such moments of humor.
Oh, hell's bells. They even shot the dog.
In this, like, gratuitous, brutal movie, they find, like, you know, just all of this, like, funny. Yeah. It isn't laugh out loud cackling funny, but
no, it's like huh.
Yeah, like, you go, yeah. Wow.
You even have that reaction around some of the Texas wisdom that will come out of Ed Tom's character.
Yeah.
And you're right. I actually completely. It's been several years since I've read the book, but I forgot about those 2 key differences because I was really trying to think as we were prepping for this episode, what's the difference in that movie? Because I'm like, it was so close. I saw the movie first, and I hadn't read any Cormac McCarthy at that time, and honestly, I was reading Blood Meridian. and I had to put it down. I was like, I can't read about another person getting scalped and getting their head stomped in, and I was like, I gotta take a break. I gotta take a break, and I'm gonna go watch a Pixar movie. And but reading that, or I watched the movie and then reading No Country for Old Men, I was struck by. I was like, this is beat for beat.
Yeah,
the movie that I know and love, and the only thing I was trying to think of it if I had done the experience in reverse, if I had read the book first and then seen the movie, the only thing I was left with was I don't know that I would have understood what the device that Anton Chigurh had.
Oh yeah, no, I think.
Do you agree with that?
I do agree.
In the film, you have to show it. You can't just vaguely describe it and describe the injury that it caused. You have to show the tank and the tube.
I'm trying for the life of me, and I think that I might have experienced this in the same order that you did. And in the movie, it's like almost this vaguely mystic, very macabre thing. And I think that only somebody who'd like worked in a slaughterhouse or something or had prior
pick up,
knowledge
would be like,
that that's what that thing did. You know,
yeah, because I was like, was that a magic trick?
Well, because it's right in the first scene, too. When he walks up and he's got the car, the cop car already, and so which is such a economical way of establishing, you know, because you go, who's this guy, and you see him, and as soon as you realize he's a killer, and you're like, and he's already killed a cop. Yeah. Because he was driving around in a cop car.
Yeah.
And so that, like, it just instantaneously cements. It's like, this guy is the fucking devil. You know? Because Chigurh is, like, pure evil. Especially the way Barnum, you know, plays him. And so it's like, so yeah, I think I was very confused by that. And again, that's where, because, you know, reading a novel, somebody goes, you may not have seen this thing before, but it's a very simple tool, and it's at the slaughterhouse, and you turn up the crank, and you describe that very easily. Whereas in a movie, the instant you like stop to catch people up to that, you're kind of making like a Big Short style movie. Or something very voiceover laden.
Oh, I see.
You know?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Like the jump to of, hey, what's this thing? And
and they do a full that, like glossary
that
description,
visual essay thing. You know, and so it was like, so yeah, I would agree with you that was, probably one of a thing that became like pertinently clear. I also think, and this is an interesting. This is an interesting difference, is that reading the book No Country for Old Men, you instantly know, because McCarthy mentions it offhandedly, that Llewellyn is a Vietnam vet. And you don't really know that in the movie until he's crossing the bridge back into Mexico in the hospital gown. And the sheriff is like, you a veteran? Which is an interesting loaded moment anyhow, because you get the idea that this border guy sees, and it puts an interesting timestamp to be like,
how'd you come to be in Mexico with no clothes?
Vietnam vets are just wilding out, you know? Like that all these guys have come back so... But it's like...
because this is probably 7 years after returning. Something. Like he's still very much in the wake of the war.
Yeah. And it's interesting because in the movie, you know that he lives out here on this ranch, and you see him hunting, you know, because he's trailing the deer when he finds the shootout. But it's like, you don't know. And then so it backfills later when the guy asks him if he's a veteran, and then you know, and you're like, oh, he's a veteran too. Yeah. So that's on some level like how he's back in the war. You know, and how he's done these survival things, because for the first part of that movie is he's like figuring out how he's being followed or something. There's almost like,
you're like, who's this Boy Scout?
Yeah, there's a preternatural degree of skill. It's like, I know this guy can track a deer, but that's a little different than running from the devil, you know? And so like, and it's one of those, and so that shows like that flexes a weird simultaneous advantage and disadvantage of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a movie, you have to show it or tell it.
Yeah.
Explicitly.
Mm-hmm.
And, and they always say, both for writing and then also talking about making film, they say, hey, show, don't tell.
Yes.
But and so that's definitely like a feature or a trait we desire. But in a movie, it's either like an Easter egg or it's explicit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you get all of your information in a movie is you see the image of it or somebody tells it to you out loud.
Mm-hmm.
In a book, it becomes way more second nature to be like, hey, this book's set in the early 80s. Hey, this guy's a Vietnam vet. He just got back. And it's one of those things where it's like, who knows? That might have, Cormac McCarthy, obviously a pretty incredible writer.
Uh-huh.
But it's one of those things where it's like, oh, that's interesting that it may not have even ever occurred to Cormac McCarthy that he would omit that information.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that the Coen brothers, in their very truthful, very adept retelling of this thing, probably noticed, because everything in the movie seems so well thought out,
mm-hmm.
meticulously engineered,
mm-hmm.
probably noticed that it never says any fucking thing about him being a veteran until he's crossing back into the United States in that hospital gown.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting difference,
mm-hmm.
And it's such a slight thing, but then certainly, changes your processing or emotional ride
mm-hmm.
through the movie or the book,
right,
respectively.
Mm-hmm. That really demonstrates kind of the difference in the mediums and
mm-hmm.
How you can tell it. An example that's kind of on a different end of the spectrum as far as how close it is to the book. And I don't know if this made it on your list, but for a book that I like the changes the most, I think the film is superb and it's extremely different from the book. Actually, two examples. Fight Club.
I was thinking of Fight Club, actually.
And The Shining.
So I've never read the whole book of The Shining.
Okay.
So you got my edge there.
Okay.
I've heard some about what a contentious relationship it is between King and Kubrick.
Yeah.
And The Shining.
But they're phenomenal works separately.
Yeah.
But they're very different stories that are told. And I think maybe less so with Polinick's Fight Club and David Fincher's film Fight Club, where things are very different in Fight Club with the story that's told and then the end product that is the visual telling.
One really well. So I'd say that a huge part of the difference in Fight Club
mm-hmm. becomes
probably that room of Hollywood producers again, because the ending of the movie, which will forever be accompanied by that Pixie song. May have solely gotten me into the Pixies, honestly, for my age and
where's my mind,
where I was when I saw that movie. And so I feel like the upbeat, hopeful nature of the end of that movie
mm-hmm.
feels, looking at it as a cynic who's been watching movies for decades now, feels very Hollywood producer. That they're they're like,
we need to tighten this up with a nice bow and
solve it, solve the thing,
mm-hmm.
and he should get the girl, and we've let you make this weird transgressive movie, but he should beat the bad guy and he should get the girl.
The bad guy can't win. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Which Tyler Durden's plan works and he wins in the end, right?
He does, but he dies.
He dies. So
he's
the
killed.
Narrator ends up in a mental institution, right?
Yeah, so in the book, he winds up in the mental institution and all of the orderlies are like, it's so brave what you're doing, Mr. Durden.
Yes.
And so there's this way where it's like he's not fucking getting out.
No.
And I want to bring up one deft change where I'm like, Oh, the movie is more efficient and slightly more cinematic.
Yeah.
There's that monologue that Brad Pitt delivers in the car. Yeah, and like they got some other Project Mayhem guys in the back seat.
Oh, yes.
And he's like just speeding up, and I forget what, and it's like, and in the book, that's just assigned to some random dude that Polnick describes as like an ex-junkie who has joined the Fight Club. He describes how scrawny and lean the guy is, but he like gives it to some other guy. And it's like, and
is it the whole if you were to die tomorrow, what would you wish you have done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Paint a self-portrait, build a house.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's this weird like, and it's funny, and it speaks to like something about novels or books, where it's like, oh yeah, well you can have a character float into one scene of a novel, say something really profound and interesting, and then flit away. And we don't need to follow up with that, people. And in a movie where you're casting everybody, you're paying everybody, their names appear in an order on a list based on how many, like, you know, definitively Brad Pitt and Ed Norton are the two male actors of that movie. And there's a lot of other good performances, but they're the two guys. And so it's very interesting to me, and I'd be curious to know if this was in like the screenwriter's screenplay, or if this was something Fincher saw, or a producer saw, or what. But it'd be like, hey, that's a great monologue, great tense moment in this book. Why isn't one of our main characters saying it? You know, like, oh,
can we assign this to?
Yeah, it shortens the circuit. It keeps more tension in the little pressure cooker combustible engine you've made about this movie, of the interplay of two of the best male actors of the day.
Yeah.
And we've put them side by side, and it's like, why would you just get some guy who only appears in one scene to say this? Because it's a great monologue.
Yeah, let's have Tyler say it.
It's quotable, you know? It's quotable. So give it to Brad.
Yeah.
You know? And so I thought... And it's like interesting because I understand why it's in the book the way that it is. But then the movie, there's a precision and an efficiency to handing that line over to Tyler Durden, as opposed to this random junkie mechanic guy.
Now, does it tie back into our main characters at the moment, and tie back into the story at the moment when Ed Norton is trying to grab the wheel, and he's like, look at you, you're fucking pathetic,
right?
And he's like, why? He's like, why do you think I blew up your condo? Like, is that when they tie it back in?
I think that is, yeah.
Because it's the moment he learns that Tyler is responsible for his
and that's
destruction.
It too. Is you gotta clip it up. I remember there's this great short chapter in Fight Club, and I think if my Polnick trivia is up to snuff, which I got an interesting sidebar to mention in a moment, but I think it's like chapter 6 or 7 or something in the book, and that it's the short story that Polnick wrote first that the rest of the novel blossomed from.
Yeah.
And it's a monologue in the movie, but it's about like watching a PowerPoint presentation and like having a black eye and a bloody nose.
Oh,
because you're just in the fight. But it's like, but that gets smushed with like a lot of it. You know, it's like they just cover a lot of ground. And again, that's the weird thing where a movie is a single serving. To quote Tyler Durden, but it's a single serving
single serving. Oh, nice.
It's a single serving friend. That was
done.
Accidental. Yeah. That was actually accidental. But it's like a movie, nice you intake in a single serving. You sit down, you watch the whole fucking thing. And a book, again, you have this like over time relationship with it.
Yeah.
You know, because even if I love a book and I have the time, still takes me like, you know, at least 2 or 3 days, even if I'm firing through a book.
Yeah.
So that's like a whole life. The movie has failed if you stop it and leave and come back to it.
Oh, you could come back in a totally different headspace.
Yeah, and so
the beginning of the movie could be great, and then you came back different, and now it sucks.
There's like a failing or a challenge for movies now, like watching things on Netflix more and more. Particularly because of the pandemic, but
watching part of a movie
easy and accessible. Well, the thing is that if I'm at a theater and I really have to pee, then like I'm holding it, trying to like sense how much more of this movie I got left, or I'm like going out in a hurry because I know that I'm gonna miss some.
You know something's gonna said, and something's gonna be done that it's like I'm gonna miss this.
I need this. Damn it! Yeah, I can't believe And then on Netflix though, if I gotta pee, I'm feeling peckish or something, I can just pause it.
Make
then
a snack,
I pause it.
Take a phone call.
Yeah, I go to the bathroom. I come out of the bathroom. I'm like, I'm gonna check my email, And so there's this way where it's like it's so much easier to detach yourself, and it's funny because it means that the most consumable movies for me on Netflix and Hulu are like action movies and sci-fi movies because there's like enough stuff get my juices flowing. Whereas if it's some kind of drama or some like before everything shut down, I watched that movie Ford v Ferrari.
Oh, yeah.
Not a huge car guy, but I was.
Did you like the movie?
Yeah, I liked it. It was.
I'm just curious because I haven't seen it, and I kind of want to. I'm not a huge car guy either, but I like all the players involved.
Yeah, I liked all the players, and it was one of those things too, though, where like again, especially pre-pandemic, it'd be normal for me to be bored some kind of evening and just be like, oh, what's playing?
Yeah.
But Ford versus Ferrari is a great example of a movie that I don't think I would have finished if I started watching it on Netflix. Not because it was bad, but because there'd be too many opportunities for me to like stop it or like check out
distracted.
Or check my phone or something. And when you're watching it and it's the size of a wall, you bought some candy and some popcorn, and it's like I'm strapped in.
Yeah.
This is, again, hopefully I don't have to pee, and this is what I'm doing for the next 2 hours.
It's the ride. The roller coaster, the harness comes down. Yeah, you're locked in.
Absolutely.
It's a good point.
Absolutely. And so it's like, it's weird because there are genres of movies that I like that are just way less successful for me to watch at home. And I think too, because I'm also because I'm single.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, because I think that like if I'm watching a movie with somebody, whether a friend or a partner or whatever, you're watching a movie with somebody, then the other person might propel you a little bit through your lag times.
Yeah, you're like, I'm not crazy about this, but I don't want to ruin their experience by saying, hey, can we turn this off?
Or they pause it, and they're just sitting there looking at the pause screen of, like, Ethan Hunt mid-jump.
Yeah.
And they're wondering the whole time you're tinkling. And they're like, what the fuck do you mean you're checking your email? We got to see if he makes the jump. And so that, like, sucks you back in. And so just being left to my own devices and being the only arbiter of play pause in my life currently, it's a hardship on a lot of movies.
Yeah. I'm curious, what was the Polinick sidebar?
Oh, Polinick sidebar is, and so this is interesting because he's got a book that is also on this list, but so a couple weeks ago, I read Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis.
Oh, Ellis, yes.
And the only Bret Easton Ellis book that I had read before that was American Psycho when I was like 17, 18, right?
Wow,
and
that's a young age to
I saw the movie or I wanted to see the movie or something. It's got Psycho right in the title. You hear it's one of those things that gets like a little like bracketed of like, oh, this is a pretty serious book, and I was a pretty serious teen, I
thought it was going to be a tasteless horror movie. I had no idea how hilarious and well made it was going to be.
Yeah,
it's
and there's a detail. There's one piece of trivia about it. I want to. It's tough. Podcasting's tough.
I like it, dude. I want us to be all over the place.
But so
wherever it goes.
So I read and was really impressed by American Psycho when I was like a teenager. or maybe the beginning of college, but it was right at the end of high school, beginning of college. So I was 17 or 19, right? Read it specifically because it was attached to this crazy fucked up movie. Was pretty impressed by it, particularly because of how crazy and fucked up it was. For whatever reason, didn't read much else by Bret Easton Ellis. Don't think I read anything else.
Okay.
Was at a used bookstore a few weeks ago, saw a copy of Less Than Zero. I was like, I'm really curious. Turns out it's his first book. It's a movie that I haven't seen, but it's a movie that kind of launches Robert Downey Jr.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yep.
And so and it's his first book. And American Psycho is like a few books later. And it was interesting because it was like a book where I felt like he was testing out the formula of what would later become American Psycho. You know how sometimes, a lot of times I feel like I'll read several books by the same guy, and there's like the masterwork where they hit it.
Yeah. And
then they've been writing kind of like around or writing soft versions of the same book many times, you know? And so they're dialing it in.
Okay.
And it's like that Less Than Zero starts out with this like teen, and clearly his family's rich, all of his friends' families are rich, and he just gets back to LA, and he's been in college in like Connecticut, and it's just these like cool, jaded, nihilist teens, you know, in the early 90s, and so MTV's playing in the background of everything.
Okay.
And they're like all doing a bunch of coke and drinking, and they're just like these disaffected youths. It was a weird, funny reminder because I was like, oh yeah, every generation believes that they're a lost generation when you're in your early 20s.
Absolutely.
You know, like everybody's like, oh no, we're the lost generation. And so I was like, oh yeah, this book was written when Gen Xers were the lost generation. And here are these like vapid teens who just have access to whatever it is they want.
Limitless.
And their lives are just degrading into nihilism. And then in the last like 75 pages of the book or so, pretty short book. It's like 200 and change, right?
Okay.
In the last 75 pages or so of the book, things start to get like really fucked up. Right? Like crimes and grotesque shit. And so it's like Easton Ellis cranking it up. And it was funny because here I am as a 32-year-old man remembering the time, 12 to 14 years ago that I read American Psycho.
Yeah.
And American Psycho was like that fucked up within the first 30 pages. You know? Like he just hits that ceiling. And so it was interesting to have the archetype. And it was interesting for me to like, it was also interesting because probably Patrick Bateman was probably ballpark early to mid 30s, like so maybe my age now.
Sure.
When I read it, and now I'm reading Less Than Zero, and all the characters are
youth,
18, 19, and
as
so
old as you were.
It was a weird like swap there.
Totally.
And I was like, interesting book, willing to read it. Didn't change my life.
Does it end with the friend ODing? Like, does he eventually die?
I think so.
See, I've seen the RDJ movie.
Well,
it's been a while.
He realizes that like RDJ's character Julian is like hustling.
Yeah.
Has like been roped in by like a pimp, and so he witnesses this thing, and there's like some. Yeah, I mean, they find a dead body in the alley, and as opposed to like, and it's more of like a tourist attraction to like all these jaded, coked up teens than anything. Yeah, they're just like, oh, you got to check out this dead body. And like as they get there, some other coked up teens are like leaving, having just been gawking at the dead body, and so it's like, oh man, none of these kids give a fuck to do anything.
No, it's just spectacle.
And so, but it was interesting because I was like, oh, he hit this button harder in American Psycho, and it was like, which he gets to a few books later, But then I was thinking about it because I've talked to a lot of people for whom Bret Easton Ellis was a similar writing figure in their lives as Palahniuk was in my life, specifically from like ages 16 through 21.
Okay.
Or something, right? And in my, and then at about 21, 22, I read like whatever Polinick's newest book was, and I felt like he was like trying to shock me. You know, like I could already, like some of the veneer, some of the magic was gone. And these ways that when I read these books, 15 through 19, I was shocked, and I was like, oh, Chuck Palahniuk's so transgressive and what a badass. And then, like, here I was in my early 20s, and I was like, I can tell he's putting it on a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Like the Chuck Palahniuk was like, how do I top myself with this next
How
book?
do I challenge my reader? Yeah.
How do I challenge my reader? And I'm Chuck Palahniuk. I've established this reputation. It's a similar change in my life that's happened with my view of Kurt Vonnegut. Because Kurt Vonnegut is another one of those guys, you first read him, you discover him in your teens or early 20s or whatever, and you're like, oh man, he's so funny and he's saying it. Nobody has the truth to say it.
He's fucking saying it, man.
A few years later, you're like, actually, a lot of people have been saying it. Like being countercultural is actually so trendy that it's definitely part of culture. And also, and a specific complaint I have about Kurt Vonnegut is the guy basically wrote like 3 or 4 different books, like 15 to 20 times.
Okay.
I've
only read Slaughterhouse. Slaughterhouse 5.
And that is one of his distinct ones, honestly. And then it's like you read like Galapagos, Slapstick, Kingdom Come, Cat's Cradle. It's like they're all like him being quippy in almost the exact same tone he is in Slaughterhouse 5.
Okay.
All as like 1 or 2 characters experience the end of the world, typically through like man tampering with science. And it's like, and they could all be in the same continuity universe. Some of them aren't, but it's like, it's this thing where it's like, oh yeah, this guy wrote almost the same quippy, clever book several times in a way where the sameness detracts from it. Now, I'm not saying, and so it was like, and there's this way too, where maybe in my 20s when I figured out the trick of some of these guys, right? And it's like if somebody goes from being in, your top 3 favorite writers or something, suddenly to not, in my experience and the way I operate with my tastes, that kind of moves them way down the list.
Okay.
Like, so Chuck went from being easily in my top 5 writers ever to like
14th or something.
Not even in the top 20.
Okay. And he took a major hit.
So I just didn't read, and then you keep finding new people and you like really go down the rabbit hole on this person and that person. So basically what I'm saying is that I picked up Chuck Palahniuk's book last week that he'd published in 2018 after not reading any Chuck Palahniuk books since like 2009.
Wow.
So it was interesting, and it was I specifically decided to do it because I'd had this experience with this Bret Easton Ellis book.
Oh,
where I was like, well, Bret Easton Ellis can't hold a candle to the significance that I thought he had when I read this one book, American Psycho, when I was 19.
Yeah.
And so it didn't make Less Than Zero a revolutionary book, but it didn't make it a bad book.
Yeah.
And then so I was like, oh, it'd be interesting to like try out this experiment with somebody that I was way further down the rabbit hole of, because I read a shit ton of Chuck books. I'd done Lullaby, Survivor.
I want to read Lullaby.
Choke.
Lullaby's basically his like Dexter.
It is,
right?
Yeah.
Is that similar? Is that fair?
Well, and it's like, it's interesting because the guy gets like a magical song, so it's like it's a semi-magical. The guy discovers like a calling lullaby, and so he can even just think it at people,
and they die.
They drop dead.
Whoa!
So it's like it's a magical.
I didn't
Dexter
even know that layer.
in that way. Yeah. But so it's interesting because I picked up this Chuck book, trying to like forgive my disowning of him.
Okay.
Well, because also I should say I had this specific falling out because I read Rant. And I really liked it. And then I read Pygmy and I couldn't finish it. And it was like his newest one that had come out. And I was like, Chuck Palahniuk's trying too hard. And then a couple years after I had quit reading Pygmy partway through, I discovered J.G. Ballard.
Okay.
And he had this book called Crash that it was hard not to feel like Chuck Palahniuk had ripped off a little bit to do Rant. And so it was like, so my last favorite Chuck Palahniuk book almost seemed to belong to J.G. Ballard, who had written it in like 1972 or something. And so that was like a weird moment I had where I was like, now wait just a second, Chuck Palahniuk. And so it was because like because at the point in time where I quit Pygmy, I was like so into him that I was reading each one of his books when they came out.
Yeah.
And so I had read Snuff, which was kind of a gross one. It was about like a big porn gangbang shoot.
Snuff films. Okay.
And and so that's like the plate in there. And then Rant, which I'd loved.
Yeah.
And then Pygmy, which I'd quit partway through. Flash forward a couple years later, and I was like, wait, is Rant just a ripoff of Crash? And then I was like, and so that put Chuck in the discard pile for me for a minute. Which is sad to say because I wrote him a letter when I was in high school and he wrote me back and he sent me a box of stuff. And so so he was somebody that so he was instrumental in this way.
Boy, that's
and then
special.
I had this weird
was it a box of books or
no, it was a box of weird random shit. And basically Chuck would, because apparently, post Fight Club or whatever, he was just inundated with fan mail. And then so he was keeping his address secret. And then every once in a while on his website, he would open like a letter receiving period. And you could write him a letter and send it to his agent's office. And they would get the letter to him.
Okay.
And then he sent me back like a box of like random stuff as well as a letter. But like bubblegum cigars and like a plush octopus toy and everything. But he'd also like clearly read my letter and responded to it. And it was so cool. And I was like a junior or senior in high school.
That's amazing.
And having that like access
to
people
incredible.
Was incredible. So I have this like, so it's a weird, and then, I'll say that I was like, I put down this Bret Easton Ellis book and was thinking about the ways that my relationship with his work was similar to my relationship with Vonnegut's work. And then I thought of Chuck Palahniuk, who I'd had like a way more intense initial relationship with his books than I'd had with Vonnegut or Ellis. And I was like, maybe it's remotely possible that early 20s Nick was a little unfair, could have been. There are other arenas of my life that I can look back about at my early and mid 20s. And again, like we were saying before we started the pod outside, it's like, and I knew I had it figured out then. And it turned out I also did not have it figured out then,
It's such a paradox in the moment where you're like, so much more than you used to. You still don't know shit. You don't know shit about shit.
Right. And that has become like a important and significant mantra to me over the last couple of years. It's like, I don't know shit about shit. And I am trying. I'm very frequently, I'm making an effort. And I hope to God that people can see and recognize that at least. And so I was like, well, potentially this falling out or the way that I'd like intentionally not read any Chuck Palahniuk. I was like, not totally fair of early 20s Nick to make that proclamation. And then easy enough for me to just not read anymore over the last decade. So I picked up at the local library, picked up his book that he put out in 2018, which I think is within the last couple of books he's written. It's called Judgment Day.
Okay.
And this is the freaky part. It totally
Just talk about a pandemic?
It does not talk about a pandemic. Okay. It talks about a successful coup against the United States government and then a sorting out into segregated ethno-states.
Wow.
By a group of people who get really into a book of like this ideologues like ethnocentrism and rebelling against your jobs that you hate thing that appeals to the masses of all of these like jaded, frustrated wage slaves and junkies and people who have felt let down by the modern economy. And then in one swooping day, they show up and they like kill pretty much all of the extant authorities. They
overthrow.
Because they have the cooperation of the police and military while they do it.
Wow.
And he published this book in 2018. And so I was like, And so it was an impressive. It was
gives
like
you a little bit of a shiver.
It was a shiver inducing, and I've got like 30 pages left. And suffice to say, it's important to say for those of you who aren't going to read it that these segregated ethno-states don't work out great. I think it's worth saying. My takeaway from this is Chuck doesn't think we should do it. I think we need each other. I think we need communal bonds. So Chuck has a community building kind of lesson in there. But it was
He's got a dark view on where things can go. And I think
he's got a dark view.
Important.
And for him to publish that book in 2018, which means he was writing it in 2017,
right? Which
means he was writing it like directly as a response
the administration
to the very beginning of the administration, too. And so it's like
the start of this.
And so it was interesting that he would have written this prediction at the end, which is a more dire and like a what if or could have been that we're looking back on, after having a little insurrection at the very beginning of this year. And so it was like, crazy. And so it was a wild, it's like a wild, interesting thing. And, and it's like, and it's a good book. And it is also like, there's also this thing, and I want to ask you this, is it's like, I feel like with books and with movies, I feel like now at this point, I have seen so many of them and been like a fan. And, both you and I as like enthusiasts who have had ambitions and participations in creating them to various degrees.
Yeah.
It's like, that amount of exposure and frequency, it's like, I don't know that a book could change my life in the way that I felt like books and movies regularly did when I was a young man, talking teens and 20s, because you're consuming things and you're like,
the sheer exposure to what
I've never fucking seen anything like that before.
Yeah. When I saw City of God.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yes. I that was my response and I was senior in high school, and I went and saw it at a little art house theater. I remember walking out and thinking, I didn't know they could make movies that way. I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
It was so different and real. But I haven't felt that way in a long time. I'll be blown away with how I can connect with a film, where I'm like, oh my God, that spoke to me so greatly. Honestly, I felt it with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah,
I have such a love for that era in Hollywood, and it pays homage to, or at least gives you glimpses of the golden era, or the golden age of cinema. And I watched it in my time that I've spent working in LA. I did walk out of the theater like, that was made for me. Like, Tarantino made that for me. And I've heard people talk about that film and say it's their least favorite Tarantino film. And I'm like, okay, that's...
It's not my least favorite.
Yeah.
But it certainly wasn't my favorite.
Yeah.
And then I thought it was interesting because actually my dad, who's like in his early 60s, and, was a huge fan of kind of that era of like 60s.
Did he not like it?
No, he loved it.
Oh, okay.
He loved it.
My dad hated it.
He was saying that it spoke directly to him. And my dad actually lived in Southern California in like the Manson era. And so he was in California like at that period of time. And between that and then also the fact that like, Monty Hellman movies were like, his introductions to like transgression, cultural transgression. And so he talked about how impactful and like struck he was by it. And it was interesting because like I saw, and so it's interesting to hear you say that and talk about like having lived in the city, because I saw some of the homages and spots, but I was like, but it didn't, it didn't like set my senses alight.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know exactly what, kind of compounding experiences led me to have that experience where I was like, this feels like this is made for me, and I am a lifetime apart from when this actually happened.
Sure.
But I will agree that to take a step back and just say, with all of the films that have influenced my opinion of film, it is hard to be blown away in the same way as in our youth, as in the same way that I saw Fight Club for the first time and really was blown away. I'm sad to say that it was totally spoiled. Like somebody completely...
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Already... Oh, they were like, they're like, just so you know, Brad Pitt and Ed Norton are the same character. I was like, what? Why would you... If I can only remember who did that.
Brutal, yeah. Just go back and just fucking find
him.
So,
do you know the impetus for Polinick writing Fight Club? Have you heard this story that he's told?
Because I think it's attached to that same chapter I mentioned, right?
Yes,
and it's
about
like that he had gotten in a bar fight or something. And...
So it's a camping trip.
Okay.
So yeah, let's tell the story and we'll end on this one, and we'll have to revisit adaptations. But the story that I've heard, and I hope I do it justice, is that he was working a very white collar job in the city, and what his tradition was on the weekends he would drive out of town. I think he was in New York City, and he would go up to upstate and he would camp.
Okay.
So he'd get out of town and he would go camping. And so one weekend that he went up camping, he picked out his campsite. And it was a standard campsite he'd been to many times. And then this group of frat brothers come and they get the site like right next to him. And they start partying. And he's up there for peace and quiet. Like he wants to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city and the screaming and the loud noises. And how he tells the story is he goes over and says, "Can you guys please keep it down?" They kind of shrug him off. He goes back. They continue their rambunctious behavior into the evening. And he gets so worked up that he goes over and really confronts them. And he's like, I'm going to get into it with these guys. And they proceed to beat the shit out of him. Now, he didn't have a great working relationship with his coworkers. But he got back to the office on Monday morning. And he's got 2 big black eyes. He's got cuts on his face. He's got a massive split lip. And no one said a thing.
Wow.
No one asked him what happened. No one inquired whatsoever. Are you okay, Chuck? Do you need to talk about it? And he said, how fucked up does somebody's personal life need to be so that you could show up to work like that and nobody asks?
That somebody like intercedes or saying, because you expect the like, oh my God, what happened? And so it's like, I've made a really poor impression here.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
And that's how he was like, I'm going to write about somebody who could show up to work that damaged and destroyed after a 2-day weekend. and no one wants to talk about it.
It made me immediately think, though, of the scene where his boss does confront him about it. And he kicks the shit out of himself in the office and throws himself through the table. Oh, what a great scene.
It's amazing.
You know? Yeah, it's one of those movies. It's like, it's one of those movies and books where it became such a cultural reference point, and it became such a iconic poster on dorm walls that it's
for sure.
that it's spoiled in its own juices a little bit by the cultural premise. I thought it was funny because he actually refers to Fight Club as a book in the landscape of Adjustment Day, the one I'm reading now. The character's like, well, in Fight Club, Polonic meant, and I thought it was so funny. I was like, yeah, that book must be so inescapable for him. In good ways and bad ways, because obviously, I'm sure that he can write almost anything and send it in and be pretty sure that they're going to publish it because he's Chuck Palahniuk, author of Fight Club. But just dragging around, this book that gained so much, accrued so much weight and momentum and force and became this giant movie with the biggest stars, and it's the torture of that, I know you're trying to wrap up.
Oh, you're good.
But you bringing this up to me, I was at a used bookstore yesterday. I was over at Second and Charles. Do you ever go to that one?
No.
It's in the Council Tree Plaza. It's like this big box store. It's like you go to a Borders of used books. It's crazy.
Oh.
But I was looking, and I just happened across a copy of L.A. Confidential, which I've never read before, but it's by James Elroy. It's really thick.
Okay.
So I already knew there was no way I was going to even get a decent chunk of the way in it in one night or something.
Yeah.
But it was specifically because we talked about that, I was like, man, I love that fucking movie.
Yeah.
I wonder what that book is like. And so I picked up that copy of that book. And so maybe next time I'll have made some headway.
Oh, man, you got to give us a little...
a little dip back into this one.
Sure. Give us a rundown on that.
Just because I was so curious. And it's it's such a iconic, excellent movie,
Rollo Tomasi. Was that what the name is?
Rollo Tomasi.
Rollo Tomasi.
Yeah.
I love that in Kevin Spacey's death after the chief of police shoots him. And he just says, Rollo Tomasi. Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. And that's such a good one. And, and that's one of those things, too, where it's I remember seeing that as a teenager and it being such a well-made noir and, so perfectly capturing the, feeling like you're back in that time and the lurid nature and just the layers of scum. And it's and so that is, one of the, cast iron greatest noir films.
It's fantastic
for me in my mind.
The culture, the class system, the racism, you get to really get the sense of the time.
The economy of the detail there of the manufacture of it and the tabloids thing and when they bust that one guy for the marijuana bust and then they're putting him up to sleep with the guy later because his life is that fucked up because he got caught by marijuana. It's all the corruption of the police force and those jailhouse beatings. I mean, it is that movie is such an epic landscape, and it's one of those things where it's will a noir movie ever be able to touch that again for me? Specifically because A, it's incredibly well done, but then B, I'd never seen a movie that was modern but so perfectly captured that period and era and just became so complex, and so this topic, I saw LA Confidential and I was like, I gotta
get
pick
it
up.
That's awesome, man. I want to hear what your take is on it.
Absolutely.
We're gonna do it again soon.
Yeah, this was a fun one, and I feel we
could come back and do this topic.
Film adaptations. Yeah, this might deserve a second.
We could do this every week for the next 52 weeks, and we would have
the sidelines and the
adapting a book for the screen is that is Hollywood's oldest trick. So
it's oldest
we
trick.
got plenty of material.
And again, I think it's so interesting, and like one of my like, I guess, final ones for this first round, you know, is it is so interesting because a novel is largely the product of a single mind, and it typically puts you in a mind or in like a God view of the landscape and world of this thing. And then films are so highly subjective, both because it takes like a village worth of people to assemble any film, and then also because you just have to sit and watch it. You know, and so there's that limitation. Time is not as magical and elastic.
And your own imagination as a audience member is not as active,
right?
If at all, other than just being an observer. Whereas in a book form, in the novel, you are creating so much of the story in your head in order to make all these things fit and visualize.
Yeah, because that's an interesting thing. I know we both said that we went this route on No Country, but it's like I typically, if I have my wherewithal about it, if I know the movie's coming, I like to read the book first.
Yeah,
because otherwise I'm trapped imagining the actors I saw in the movie do the thing. Yeah, you know, and it's interesting to like. And I feel like I've read things before, and I've heard the main character's voice in the film and been like, they got his voice all wrong.
That's not what he sounds like. Yeah, not in my head.
His voice. You kidding me? Yeah, fascinating stuff.
You're fascinating, Nick. You're a single mind, and I love you, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me again, man.
Let's do it again.
Absolutely.
All right, this is Hot Mike. We're out. See you next time.